Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Osaka and I'm thrilled to have you here today. Before we dive into the content, I'd appreciate it if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support goes a long way in helping me continue to create quality content. Also, be sure to click the notification bell to stay informed about all future uploads so you don't miss out on any new and exciting videos. Thank you for being here, and let's get started. Today, I will be telling you a short story that I made up that I call The Mirror. With that being said, let us begin. Elizabeth had always loved antiques, and living in Queens gave her the perfect playground. She had a special eye for finding treasures that others overlooked. One afternoon, she stumbled upon a small, dusty shop at the end of a forgotten alley. The smell of aged wood and forgotten memories filled the air as she stepped inside. The shopkeeper, an old man with a hunchback and eyes that seemed too sharp for his age, greeted her with a nod. "Anything in particular you're looking for?" he asked, his voice crackling like old parchment. Elizabeth shook her head, her curiosity leading her deeper into the cluttered room. Her fingers grazed over the aged surfaces of various items until something caught her eye. In the far corner behind a stack of boxes stood an ornate mirror. It was tall, its frame carved from dark wood, with swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the dim light. "Oh, this is beautiful," Elizabeth muttered to herself. Moving toward it, the shopkeeper appeared at her side, as if from nowhere. His voice was lower now. "That mirror has a history. Some say it's cursed." Elizabeth laughed softly. "Cursed? You don't really believe that, do you?" The old man didn't smile. His gaze lingered on the mirror, then on her. "I don't believe in much anymore, but I've heard things about that one." "How much for it?" Elizabeth asked, brushing aside the man's eerie tone. "Are you sure you want it?" His eyes bored into hers. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment, unnerved by his intensity, but curiosity got the better of her. "I'll take it." The man paused, then nodded slowly. "Very well, it's yours." The old man grins. "Call it a gift." From one collector to another, returning home with the mirror, Elizabeth felt overjoyed at such a find. That night, Elizabeth hung the mirror in her bedroom. The mirror was indeed beautiful. The reflection was crystal clear, but there was something about it that unsettled her. She told herself it was just her imagination, the result of the shopkeeper's ominous warning. She shook off the feeling and climbed into bed. Over the next few months, strange things began to happen. At first, it was subtle small objects in her room seemed to shift, though she couldn't remember moving them. The air felt heavier, and sometimes she had the unsettling feeling of being watched. The sensation was strongest when she was near the mirror. One night, while lying in bed, Elizabeth noticed something odd in the reflection. The room in the mirror looked exactly the same, but the shadows seemed darker, almost alive. Then she saw it, a figure, barely visible, lurking just outside the reflection's edge. She bolted upright, her eyes darting around the room. There was nothing there, but when she glanced back at the mirror, the figure was closer, standing just behind her, reflected self. "That's not possible," she whispered, her heart pounding. Elizabeth grabbed a bedsheet and threw it over the mirror, breathing heavily. "It's just in my head," she murmured to herself, trying to calm her racing mind. But that night, her dreams were plagued with nightmares. She dreamt of being trapped in an endless hallway of mirrors, her reflection constantly mocking her, twisting into grotesque shapes, clawing at her and ripping her apart. When she awoke, the bedsheet had somehow slipped off the mirror. Terrified, she called the shop the next morning, hoping the shopkeeper could explain. But the number was disconnected. In a panic, she rushed back to the alley, only to find the shop had vanished, as if it had never existed. Later that evening, Elizabeth stood before the mirror, hammer in hand. "This ends tonight," she said, her voice trembling. Her reflection stared back, perfectly still, emotionless. As she raised the hammer, her reflection smiled. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. "No," she whispered, "that's not real." But it was. Slowly, her reflection stepped forward, its movements no longer hers. Elizabeth stood paralyzed as the figure reached through the glass, its cold hand gripping her wrist with a strength that made her gasp. "What are you?" Elizabeth's voice was barely a whisper, her mind unable to process what was happening. Her reflection's grin widened. "Stupid girl, can't you see? I am you." Before Elizabeth could react, her reflection yanked her into the mirror. The world around her spun violently, and she found herself plunged into darkness. When she opened her eyes, she was standing in her bedroom again, but everything was wrong. The colors were muted, the air thick and heavy, and the shadows danced unnaturally. Frantically, she looked around and saw her own body, her real body, standing just beyond the glass, hammer in hand. Her reflection, now fully in control of her physical form, stared back at her, grinning back at her. "No, please, let me out," Elizabeth screamed, banging on the glass with all her might. "Let me out! Help me! Someone, anyone, help me! Let me out!" Her reflection tilted its head, studying her like a specimen. "You've had your turn," it said calmly. "Now it's my turn to have fun. And fun I shall have. Please," Elizabeth begged, tears streaming down her face. "Don't do this." The reflection smirked. "I already have." Elizabeth's heart sank as she watched her reflection walk away, leaving her trapped in the cold, empty world behind the glass. She screamed, clawed at the mirror, but it was no use. Weeks passed, then months. Elizabeth began to realize she wasn't alone in this mirrored prison. Faint shapes of others, their faces twisted in silent agony, hovered just out of sight. They were all dead, hollow shells of people who were trapped here in this mirrored world before her. Even more time passed, and Elizabeth's reflection lived her life, maliciously twisting her relationships, having sexual interactions with men she had never met, sowing chaos wherever it went, forcing Elizabeth to watch from behind the glass of the mirror, and no one noticed. No one could see the darkness now wearing Elizabeth's face. As the months continued to drag on, Elizabeth's sense of self began to erode. She watched helplessly as her reflection grew stronger, while her own identity faded. The last thing she saw before her consciousness dissolved was her reflection wearing her smile as it whispered through the glass. "It's your own fault, you know. Should have listened to that old man. He did try to warn you." Still grinning, "You never should have bought the mirror." Elizabeth tried banging on the glass in anger, but it was no use. She was too weak. Elizabeth's reflection, now fully in control, glanced at her faint image trapped within the glass. It chuckled softly, the sound eerie and unfamiliar to Elizabeth's own ears. "You'll get used to it in time, or maybe not," it said, its voice fading as her presence weakened further. With the last of her strength, Elizabeth tried to scream, but no one could hear her now. Elizabeth was turned into nothing more than a shadow trapped in the cold, reflective prison. Her body moved on its own, leaving her a spectator to the life that once belonged to her. Her reflection lived her life perfectly, mimicking her mannerisms, speaking in her voice, even fooling those closest to her. Elizabeth's reflection would grin and whisper again softly. Soon, Another will take your place when you are gone. The reflection pulled a dust-covered bed sheet from the closet and threw it over the mirror. Elizabeth, from within, watched as her world was cast into darkness. Her thoughts raced, desperate for escape, but she was no longer in control. The reflection left the house that afternoon, carrying the covered mirror to the local antique shop. She had found its new location. The shopkeeper, the same old man as before, barely raised an eyebrow as he accepted the item. People always bring it back, he muttered under his breath. They never listen, and so the mirror sat there again, waiting patiently for its next curious buyer, who would stare into its depths. Drawn in by its allure, Elizabeth's faint whispers echoed within the glass, but they were too soft to be heard, too late to serve as a warning. The mirror was ready for its next victim. The end. That's all for this story. Thank you for taking the time to watch today's video. I truly hope you found it both engaging and insightful. If you enjoyed the content, I would greatly appreciate it if you could show your support by liking this video and subscribing to my channel. Your feedback helps me continue to create valuable content for you. Be sure to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. I am Osaka and I look forward to seeing you again soon. So until then, take care. Thank you and goodbye.